Welcome back, everybody. These are the best horror films that came out in 1989. We're now wrapping up the entire decade of the 80s, the best horror films of that decade, which were the best horror films of all time, in my opinion. Let's get into the best horror films that scared audiences worldwide in movie theaters, drive-ins, made-for-TV, and cable TV. These are the best horror films. These are all the horror films, every single horror film that was released in 1989. Let's check out if some of these are your favorites. You don't recognize any of these or some of these, but these are all the films. So let's check out all the best horror films of 1989. Sleepaway Camp 3: Teenage Wasteland. After murdering a young girl, Angela Baker assumes her identity and travels to Camp New Horizons, built on the grounds of the camp she terrorized a year before. A Nightmare on Elm Street: The Dream Child. The pregnant Alice finds Freddy Krueger striking through the sleepy mind of her unborn child, hoping to be reborn into the real world. This movie was good. All the Nightmare on Elm Streets were great. After Midnight. A college class, Psychology of Fear, has a new teacher who believes that you have to feel fear to understand it. After Midnight will not disappoint. Horror and thriller. Alien Space Avenger. In 1939, a spaceship carrying 4 alien escaped prisoners crash lands on Earth, and the aliens take over the bodies of 4 locals. Alien Space Avenger. American Rickshaw. A Miami manual rickshaw driver finds himself entangled in the murder of a man he just met. American Rickshaw. Action, horror, and thriller. Amityville Horror: The Evil Escapes. The demonic forces in the Amityville house transfer to an ancient lamp, which finds its way to a remote California mansion where the evil manipulates a little girl by manifesting itself in the form of her dead father. Baxter. A white bull terrier named Baxter is given to an elderly woman by her daughter. As time passes, the dog develops aggressive and murderous behavior in order to be adopted by another family. Don't mess with Baxter. Beverly Hills Vamp. A trio of geeks go to Hollywood to make a movie and are bored one night, so they get some hookers and sluts to have sex with. Unfortunately, the hookers and sluts drink blood. Beware Children at Play. A mentally disturbed teenager kidnaps and brainwashes children into cannibalistic psychopaths, but not when the adults intervene. Beware Children at Play will not disappoint. Comedy, crime, and horror. Beyond Dream's Door. Ben hasn't been able to dream since the death of his parents, but as he attempts to make human connections, his nightmares begin to spill over into daily lives. Beyond Dream's Door. Beyond the Door 3. An introverted American student of Balkan descent travels to Yugoslavia as part of a school trip to witness an ancient pagan ritual, but the pagans hide a deadly secret. Beyond the Door 3. Black Rainbow. A medium has a vision of a hitman killing his target. The vision comes true and the same hitman is assigned to kill her. Horror and thriller. Black Rainbow. This movie will not disappoint. Has you on the edge of your seat. Blades. Somewhere in New Jersey, a killer lawnmower stalks a small town's golf course. Parody, comedy, and horror. Blades. So it's a killer lawnmower that kills people. A lawnmower. Blind Faith. Based upon the true story of Philadelphia sex killer Gary Hines, Blind Faith follows the investigations of his grisly crimes through the eyes of a detective. Blind Faith. Crime, horror, and thriller. Blood Nasty. Roy is killed by a couple of jewel thieves and then brought back to life and possessed by deceased serial killer Blade. Dark comedy, and horror. If you like a few laughs, some jump scares, Blood Nasty is great. The Bloody Monks or Blood Screams. When the townspeople of a small Mexican village start disappearing, the locals point to the suspicion of two young visitors. Fantasy, horror, and thriller. Blue Vengeance. Considered too dangerous to be on the force, ex-cop Mickey is tormented by the brutal murder of his partner. Action, crime, horror, and thriller. Blue Vengeance. This movie is good. A lot of action. The Burbs. An overstressed suburbanite and his neighbors are convinced that the new family on the block is part of a murderous satanic cult. Dark comedy, mystery, and horror. The Burbs, one of the best films of 1989 and horror. Buried Alive. A new teacher at a facility for juvenile delinquent girls starts to suspect foul play when the girls end up dying and disappearing one by one. Buried Alive. Slasher horror, and thriller. Cannibal women in the avocado jungle of death. The U.S. government, eager to protect the nation's avocado supplies, recruits feminist Professor Margot to make contact with the piranha women. The Cellar. Monster horror, supernatural horror. A family moves into an old house in the Texas desert that is haunted by a Native American curse in the form of a ferocious creature that lives in the cellar. Chopper Chicks in Zombie Town. A gang of tough women bikers are the only thing that stands out between a crowd of zombies, which have been accidentally let out of their cage. Zombie horror, comedy, and horror. Chud 2, Bud the Chud. A military experiment to create a race of super warriors go awry, and legions of murderous zombies are unleashed on a suburban neighborhood. Chud 2, Bud the Chud. Clown House. Just before Halloween, three young brothers alone in a big house are menaced by three escaped mental patients who have murdered some traveling circus clowns and assumed their identity. Clown House. Cold Light of Day. Fictionalized account based on the actions of serial killer Dennis Nilsen. Biography, crime, horror, and thriller. Cold Light of Day will not disappoint. If you like thriller and horror, you'll love this movie. Criminal Act. Tunnels. Two investigative reporters track down reports of giant rats in city sewer system. Criminal Act, or another name for it, Tunnels. Curfew. Two escaped brothers track down the people who sentenced them to death row, including the doctor and the judge. But when they get to the DA, he and his family have an especially lengthy revenge plan for them. Curfew. Curse 2, The Bite. After being bitten by a radioactive snake, a young man begins to spawn snake-like creatures with a vicious, murderous nature. Horror. The Curse 2, The Bite. Cutting Class. High school student Paula Carson's affections are sought by two classmates, Bad Boy Dwight and Disturbed Brian, who has just been released from a mental hospital, featuring Brad Pitt in one of his earliest films. Dance of the Damned. A vampire follows his instincts to a strip joint where he focuses in on one of the performers. Dance of the Damned. Drama, horror, romance, and thriller. This movie will not disappoint. The Scorcher. Dark Tower. A partially under construction office tower is being haunted by a deadly presence which seems to target the building's architect. Horror, mystery, and thriller. Dark Tower is kind of spooky and eerie. Dark Heritage. Reporter Clint is sent to investigate a massacre at Louisiana campground and finds that it may be linked to the Dancing Clan, an old local family thought to have died out years ago. Dark Heritage. Dead Calm. After a tragedy, John Ingram and his wife Ray are spending some time isolated at sea when they come across a stranger who has abandoned a sinking ship. Dead Calm. Psychological thriller, horror, and thriller. The Dead Next Door. An elite anti-zombie team is assembled by the government to cope with an ever-growing undead infection of the religious cult zealots who fanatically protect the festering foes. The Dead Next Door. Death doll. Look at that face. A woman is stalked by a killer who is obsessed with leaving dolls at the scene of the crime. I love it. I love this movie. You kill somebody and then leave a doll at the scene of the crime. I love it. Next up we have is Deep Star 6. A team of Navy personnel stationed at a temporary base at the bottom of the ocean and tasked with setting up nuclear missiles discovers a huge underwater cavern which houses a giant prehistoric creature. Deep Star 6 is scary. Demon Stone. 2 U.S. Marines investigators looking into a series of grisly murders in Manila discovered that the crimes are tied to an amulet with a 400-year-old curse. Demon Stone. Action, crime, fantasy, and horror. Edge of Sanity. When Henry Jekyll's experiments with cocaine have gotten out of control, he transforms into the hideous Jack Hyde. Slasher, horror, drama, horror, and mystery. And thriller, Edge of Sanity. Elves. A woman finds she is part of a Nazi breeding experiment with elves to create Supermen. She and friends are trapped in a store with an elf. Only a renegade Santa Claus can save them. Elves. Ballet. Young American ballerina enrolls in prestigious ballet school in Hungary. She suddenly becomes inexplicably obsessed with Tchaikovsky's Swan Lake. Fantasy, romance, thriller, and horror. Ballet. The Evil Below. A down-on-his-luck sea captain goes treasure hunting for a wrecked Spanish galleon that is rumored to be cursed by God and protected by supernatural forces. The Evil Below. Fair Game. Gene, a clever but seriously deranged computer game designer, has been left by his wife, Eva. Unable to win her back, he decides to take revenge by locking Eva in a new apartment. Horror and thriller. Fair Game. The Fly 2. The almost human son of the Bundlefly searches for a cure to mutated genes while being monitored by a nefarious corporation. So this is the son of the Fly. The Fly 2 with Daphne Zuniga. Food of the Gods 2. A growth hormone experiment gets out of hand when the resulting giant man-eating rats escape, wreaking havoc on the unsuspecting campus. Foods of the God 2. Freak Show. A self-centered reporter is subjected to 4 tales of terror at a strange museum. Drama, fantasy, horror, and mystery. Freak Show. So if you like scary films and stories, this movie's for you. Friday the 13th, Part 8, Jason Takes Manhattan. Jason Voorhees is accidentally awakened from his watery grave and ends up stalking a ship full of graduating high school students heading to Manhattan, New York. I like this movie because it was out of the Camp Crystal Lake and into the streets of Manhattan. Girlfriend from Hell. The inventor of the condom, now God's bounty hunter, is tasked with tracking down and capturing the devil. Dark comedy, parody, slapstick, and horror. Girlfriend from Hell. Godzilla vs. Biolante. Desolate by the loss of his daughter, a geneticist creates a monstrous new mutation. Biolante. Godzilla vs. Biolante. Grave Secrets. A woman tormented by ghostly apparitions and a professor of psychic phenomena investigate otherworldly disturbances and unlock the secret of a malevolent force reaching out for vengeance from beyond the grave. Gun's Eye. A man buys a World War II Luger pistol only to be possessed by it, and all its previous owners were. It eventually merges with his hand as he goes on a shooting spree, so the gun is possessed and kills people. Halloween 5, The Revenge of Michael Myers. I love this film. Only one year after the events of Halloween 4, The Return of Michael Myers, 1988, the Shape returns to Haddonfield once again in an attempt to kill his mute niece. Heavy Metal Massacre. A killer goes on a killing spree at a heavy metal club. Slasher horror. I love it. Heavy Metal Massacre. If you love heavy metal and music, you'll love this film. Hell High. Still haunted by the death of 2 teens that she accidentally caused as a young girl, a teacher goes berserk when 4 teens start harassing her then attack her in her home. slasher horror, teen horror. Hell High. Hellgate. A motorcycle gang kidnaps a young woman, Josie, from a diner and brutally kills her. Horror. Hellgate will not disappoint. See you in hell. That's how the movie goes. See you in hell. Hitcher in the Dark. A sick young man drives around in his daddy's camper looking for lone stray females to kidnap, torture, rape, and murder. Horror thriller. Hitcher in the Dark. So it's about sluts and hookers and tramps. Howling 5, The Rebirth. Howling 5. A group of strangers visit an ancient Hungarian castle and bring along a werewolf. Howling 5, The Rebirth. A lot of jump scares. It's pretty good. House 3, The Horror Show. Detective McCarthy finally catches the meat cleaver Max, a serial killer who promises revenge during his execution. House 3, The Horror Show. Slasher horror, supernatural horror. The House of Usher. An engaged couple going to the man's uncle's house get into a car accident. The woman becomes trapped in the house with deranged residents and weird happenings. The House of Usher. Houseboat Horror. A rowdy rock group are accompanied by a film crew to desolate Lake Infinity to produce a music video. Slasher horror and horror. If you like slashers and jump scares, you'll love this movie. The House of Clocks. 3 low-life punks are trapped in a posh villa while trying to rob it and become at the mercy of the murderous owners. Dark comedy and horror. The House of Clocks. Clocks. I, Madman. Slasher horror. A bookshop clerk and wannabe actress starts seeing the disfigured killer from her 1950s pulp novels come to life. I, Madman. Intruder. The overnight stock crew of a local supermarket find themselves being stalked and slashed by a mysterious maniac. I love it. Takes place in a shopping mall. Intruder. Slasher horror, horror, and thriller. I love Intruder. Killer Crocodile. A group of environmentalists arrives at a faraway tropical delta where toxic waste is being dumped. However, the water hides a giant crocodile. Adventure, horror, sci-fi, and thriller. The Kitchen Sink. A woman finds something quaint in her kitchen sink and feels strangely captivated towards it. Horror. The Kitchen Sink. Next up we have is Las Vegas Bloodbath. Slasher horror. After Sam's wife has betrayed him, he goes on a bloody killing spree in Las Vegas. Las Vegas Bloodbath. And now you're trying to kill me. And now you're trying to kill me. Leviathan. Perched on the hull of a wrecked Soviet freighter, a team of deep-sea miners led by head oceanographer Steven comes back face to face with a mutant creature. Leviathan. Body horror, adventure, and horror. Lobster Man from Mars. A movie mogul in search of a tax shelter screens a space parody about a young woman, a mad scientist, and a space monster. Parody, comedy, horror, and sci-fi. Lobster Man from Mars. And now he's trying to kill me. Lords of the Deep. Man has finally conquered the ocean. America's first self-contained undersea laboratory is the pride of the nation until problems develop. Lords of the Deep. The Mask of the Red Death. Lovely photographer Rebecca winds up in a Bavarian castle at the Mask of the Red Death, partly hosted by the wealthy Ludwig. Horror. The Mask of the Red Death will not disappoint. Massacre. A red-gloved killer sporting gaudy Miami Vice-style mirrored shades brutally assaults a prostitute, hooker, and slut with a blade. Horror and thriller. Massacre. So he's killing hookers, sluts, and tramps. Maya. An ancient evil awakens in small Mexican village and many people fall victim to its curse. Horror. Maya. The Maya villages. So be careful. Meet the Hollowheads. The Hollowheads, a slightly darker and more satirical 80s take on the Jetsons, have their hands full when the head of the family's abusive boss invites himself over for dinner. Midnight Movie Massacre. A Martian begins to attack the patrons and staff of a movie theater during the 50s as a low-budget science fiction plays films on the screen. So they're watching a horror film from real-life Martians and start attacking the moviegoers. Matinee. A small, depressed Canadian town is about to relive its tragic past when a popular movie director comes back to town. But who is the killer? Slasher, horror, mystery, and thriller. Danger, USA. An actress takes revenge on a murderous team of sadistic Russian spies bent on locating the mysterious dream machine her father invented. You see, I'm an actress too, because right now I'm acting like I didn't hear what you just said to me. Alright. Monster High. Two aliens steal a doomsday device from another world and abscond to Earth. Parody, comedy, horror, and sci-fi. Monster High. You want to get comedy? You'll love it. Monstrosity. This garish monstrosity. A young man whose girlfriend was killed by street thugs builds a golem, which is then programmed to go out and kill the thugs. Monstrosity. Look at this garish monstrosity. Moonstalker. Not to be confused with Moonraker. During the winter season, a family camping in the woods and a group of camp counselors training in the same forest both find themselves being killed one by an unhinged psycho. Moonstalker. Moontrap. NASA finds remains of an ancient humanoid race on the moon that left behind deadly robots. Space, sci-fi, and horror. Moontrap. Murder weapon. Two mobsters' daughters leave a sanitarium, host a party inviting ex-boyfriends, who then start disappearing mysteriously. Murder weapon. Slasher, horror, and horror. My Mom's a Werewolf. After being bitten by a mysterious pet shop owner, housewife Leslie begins a gruesome transformation into a werewolf. Werewolf horror, comedy, horror. My Mom's a Werewolf. This movie is good. Nick Knight. When a detective tries to cure himself of his vampirism, he is confronted by the monster who turned him into a blood-sucking creature. Vampire horror. Nick Knight. Night Shadow. Big shot TV newswoman returns home for a vacation, as several of the town's residents start dying under mysterious circumstances. Night Shadow. Night Terror. A man is plagued by recurring nightmares, and when he wakes up and finds that the nightmares he just dreamed of keep coming true. So he's dreaming bad dreams, and then the dreams come true. Imagine that. Night Visitor. A student known for telling stories witnesses a murder, the latest in a series of satanic killings of hookers, sluts, and prostitutes. Night Visitor. Night Life. Look at all these movies that start with night. Archie is a brain at a small town high school who works part-time at his uncle's mortuary and is harassed by a few of the popular kids because of it. Horror. Nightlife. Nightmare Beach. Again, the common theme is night. After the execution of a motorcycle gang leader convicted of murder, a helmeted biker goes on a killing spree during spring break in Florida. Sounds like a revenge movie to me. Night Wish. Here's another movie with night. A professor and 4 graduate students journey to a house in the mountains to investigate paranormal activities, but the experiment goes wrong after an alien entity starts attacking them. Offerings. 10 years after he was pushed down a well, a young man kills off the neighborhood bullies who tormented him. Slasher horror. Offerings. I love it. I love it. Dr. Caligari. The granddaughter of an infamous doctor experiments with hormone and shock therapies at her asylum for the insane. You are insane. I love it. Paganini horror. When a female rock band uses an infamous old piece of sheet music to record their new album in an old mansion, they accidentally open a portal to hell. Paganini Horror. Horror and music. Painted Black. Not to be confused with the Rolling Stones. Painted Black. A serial killer covers his victims in modeling clay, and a local sculptor is accused of the crimes. Painted Black. Horror and thriller, featuring Doug Savant before Melrose Place. Parents. A young boy living in 1950s suburbia suspects that his parents are cannibalistic murderers. Dark comedy, satire, comedy, and horror. Pet Cemetery. After tragedy strikes, a grieving father discovers an ancient burial ground behind his home with the power to raise the dead. Pet Cemetery. Folk horror, tragedy, fantasy, and horror. The Phantom of the Opera. A young soprano becomes the obsession of a horribly disfigured composer who has plans for those who oppose him or the younger singer. Drama horror. Phantom of the Mall, Eric's Revenge. A man loses his home and suffers life-threatening burns from a fire deliberately set by commercial real estate developers vying for his property. Phantom of the Mall, Eric's Revenge. You know what this is about. Power Games. A group of teenagers training for the National Power Commando Championship Games mistakenly find themselves on the land owned by drug merchants. Power Games. 6 college students on their weekend vacation are humiliated and killed one by a psycho cop. B-horror, dark comedy, and slasher horror. And now he's trying to kill me. Kill me. Kill me. Puppet Master. Psychics find themselves plotted against by a former colleague who committed suicide after discovering animated, murderous puppets. Puppet Master. Return of the Family Man. A group of tourists from different corners of the world are planning to stay in an abandoned house, which happens to be the place where an insane serial killer massacred his complete family 10 years ago. The Return of the Swamp Thing with Heather Locklear of Melrose Place. In this tongue-in-cheek sequel, the benevolent bog creature falls for the vegetarian, plant-loving daughter of the evil scientist who created him. Robot Ninja. A scientist helps a comic book artist become a superhero and is created in order to battle a vicious gang of rapists. Robot Ninja. And now he's trying to kill me. Rock-a-die baby, rock-a-die sweet. A mother tells her daughter 3 scary bedtime stories. Rock-a-die baby. I just invented that. Rock-a-die baby. Next thing we have is Santet 2. Katemi, shunned for past murders, is cursed by a knee mentor, transforming her into a vicious tiger each night. Santet 2. Horror. So she turns into a tiger and kills people. Satan's Storybook. A 2-part horror anthology, the first part about a serial killer who is executed for a string of murders, and the second about a despondent actor who hangs himself and meets a clown on the other side. She's Back. A henpecked electrician is nagged by his recently deceased wife into taking revenge on the gang responsible for her death. She's Back. Comedy, horror, and drama. Shocker. Slasher horror. After being sent to the electric chair, a serial killer uses electricity to come back from the dead and carry out his revenge. Shocker will not disappoint. Silent Night, Deadly Night 3, Better Watch Out. The comatose Ricky Caldwell reawakens and begins to stalk a blind woman who he shares a psychic connection with. Silent Night, Deadly Night 3, Better Watch Out. Slash Dance. A female cop goes undercover as a dancer at an old theater to catch a serial killer who has been murdering women auditioning for a musical. Slash Dance, not to be confused with Flash Dance. Society. An ordinary teenage boy discovers his family is part of a gruesome orgy cult for the social elite. Body horror and dark comedy. Sounds of silence. Living the good life in Southern California photographer Peter, his fiancée Sarah, and their mute son Dennis travels to Sweden. Next to Peter's inherited mansion is an old haunted orphanage. Stepfather 2, Make Room for Daddy. After escaping the insane asylum in which he was incarcerated, Jerry Blake impersonates a marriage counselor and manages to win over a patient Meg Foster and her younger son, Jonathan Brandis. Sundown, the Vampire in Retreat. Reclusive vampires lounge in a lonely American town. Comedy, horror, and western. Sundown at the Vampire in Retreat. If you love horror films, you'll love this movie. Witch Story. Siblings and friends visit an inherited house, unaware it's haunted by demons, and a witch goes seeking revenge for her execution. Witch Story, or better known as Strange. Surgikill. A masked killer is killing off doctors and nurses and patients at a poorly run hospital in Los Angeles. So a masked killer is killing everybody in sight for revenge and treatment. The Sweet House of Horrors. A drama murder couple return from the beyond to care for their 2 lacking children. Tales from the Gimli Hotel. When their mother is dying at the modern Gimli, Manitoba hospital, 2 young children are told a tale of their Icelandic grandmother. Tales from the Gimli Hotel. Teen Vamp. Murphy is a horny high school boy. He has a crush on the cute blonde Connie, but she has laughs into his face. Dark comedy, teen comedy, and comedy. Teen Vamp will not disappoint. Dark comedy and horror. Terror Eyes. A frustrated advertising executive is confused to receive a job assignment from her boss to write the screenplay to a horror film. Terror Eyes. Comedy, horror, and thriller. The Terror Within. When a chemical warfare leaves the world barren and filled with mutated monsters, a band of survivors in an underground complex battle one of the creatures that was able to break in. The Terror Within. The Banker. High-priced prostitutes are being systematically murdered, their corpses mutilated, and a bizarre South American supply painted in the blood is found at the scene. The Banker. The movie is creepy and eerie and scary. The Basement. 4 strangers are summoned to the basement of an abandoned house by a mysterious entity known only as the Sentinel. Next film we have is The Chilling. The bodies of a cryogenic center are defrosted by accident and turn into cannibalistic zombies. The Chilling, horror, with Linda Blair. We love Linda Blair. The Church. An old Gothic cathedral built over a mass grave develops strange powers that trap a number of people inside the ghost from the 12th century massacre. The Church will not disappoint. It is horror, creepy, and suspenseful. The House on Tombstone Hill. Friends go inspect an old house. They find the grave of the woman in front of the yard. One of them smashes the headstone and awakens her vengeance. The House on Tombstone Hill. This movie is good. A lot of payback. The Freeway Maniac. A crazed killer sneaks onto the set of a sci-fi film and begins murdering the cast and crew. The Freeway Maniac will not disappoint. I love it. The Immortalizer. A crazed scientist sends out his mutant creations to kidnap young, beautiful men and women to bring back to his lab so he can replace their brains with those of old, wealthy people. Horror and sci-fi. The Laughing Dead. A ragtag group of people go on an archaeological trip to Mexico to visit the Mayan ruins. The Laughing Dead. This movie will not disappoint, and it's a scorcher. The Dead Pit. The arrival of an amnesiac patient in a psychiatric hospital somehow frees a mad doctor who was shot and entombed with his fiendish experiments in an abandoned wing of the asylum 20 years before. The Forgotten One. A recently widowed writer moves into a Victorian house that is supposedly haunted. Horror, mystery, romance, and thriller. Featuring Christy McNichol. We love Christy McNichol. The Haunting of Sarah Hardy. A woman's husband and his lover try to drive her mad at the seaside mansion. The Haunting of Sarah Hardy. So if you like gay films, this is a good gay film. The Mask of the Red Death. There's another movie poster for it. Lovely photographer Rebecca winds up in a Bavarian castle, party hosted by the wealthy Ludwig. The Mask of the Red Death. Horror. The Toxic Avenger Part 3, The Last Temptation of Toxie. Toxie finds he has nothing to do as a superhero, as he has ridden his city of evil. Parody, satire, slapstick, and superhero. The Toxic Avenger Part 3. The Woman in Black. A lawyer travels to a small seaside town to settle the estate of the recently deceased woman. The Woman in Black is creepy, horror, and mystery. The Vineyard. World-famous winemaker Elson Poe invites several actors to his estate to audition for a movie he's financing. Horror. Next up we have is Things. An impotent husband, driven by a fanatical desire to father children, forces his wife to undergo a dangerous experiment. The result, the birth of a multitude of monsters. Things. So, Things is kind of eerie and creepy. Transylvania Twist. The nephew of a librarian must go collect a 200-year-old book, the Book of Othar. Parody, comedy, fantasy, and horror. Trapped. Marianne Marshall is a woman working late in her locked high-rise office building who, along with John Doe, struggle to elude a killer trying to kill them. Horror and thriller. It happened. It's called Trapped. Unmasked Part 25. Jackson is a lonely serial killer who is really beginning to question the point of all his killing. Parody, comedy, drama, and horror. So if you like horror and zombies, you'll love this movie. Vampire versus Vampire. A priest discovers that the water supply in his village has become contaminated by bats. And while in the process of doing a well to find a new water supply, he inadvertently unearthed the corpses of an evil Western priest. Warlock. A warlock flees from the 17th century to the 20th century with a witch hunter in hot pursuit. Supernatural horror, witch horror, and horror. Warlock will not disappoint. The Weirdo. After years of torment and torture, a disturbed young man snaps and takes out his frustration in particularly violent ways. Horror and drama. Wicked Stepmother. A mother and daughter pair of witches wreak havoc on a suburban family. Wicked Stepmother. Comedy and fantasy. I love it. I love it. Witchcraft 2, The Temptress. Witch from the first witchcraft movie stalks the now teenage child. She attempts to kill his friends in order to slowly corrupt him to Satan. Witch Trapped. Parapsychologists try to make an inn haunted by an evil witch's ghost safe for guests. Witchcraft. I love it. Those were the best horror films that came out in the year 1989. Let me know if there's any films that I may have left out, which I highly doubt. Let me know which films were some of your favorites, if not the favorite horror films of 1989. We covered zombies, we covered monsters, we covered sea creatures, we covered some paranormal activity, and we still covered the classic slasher film of the 80s. Alright, I'm Tony. Thanks for watching Yesteryear TV. Hope you enjoyed this video. Stay tuned for the next series, the best horror films of the 90s. We're going to cover 1990 all the way through 1999. 1990s were the grunge era. We're which pretty much killed 80s heavy metal. So we're going to see which horror films were scaring audiences during the 90s. Join me, alright? Thanks everybody, I'll see you folks real soon.